This is Rummy's Corner. At the conclusion of 1989, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. There are 10 names on the list, but for most boxing fans, only one name mattered: the one at the top. Mike Tyson was the baddest man on the planet. At just 23 years old, he was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, having successfully unified the titles of all three major sanctioning bodies. Tyson utilized an explosive style and devastating knockout power to capture the imagination of the boxing public. His dominance from the late 80s was expected to continue well into the 90s. The first heavyweight matchup of interest in the 90s was billed as the Preacher and the Puncher, a bout that took place between former world champion George Foreman and former world title challenger Jerry Cooney. Both fighters had been on the comeback trail, and neither was expected to make any serious noise. But when they squared off against each other, the boxing world took notice. Foreman stopped Cooney in the second round, dropping him once just before finishing him off with a powerful short left hook. It was a victory that brought a lot of positive attention to Big George's comeback efforts. When undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson defended his titles against Buster Douglas, it was expected to be nothing more than a mere formality in the lead up to a highly anticipated showdown between Tyson and Evander Holyfield. But instead of the early knockout for Tyson that most were expecting, we got what was to this day arguably the biggest upset in the history of professional sports. A perfect storm scenario involving the death of Buster Douglas's mother and an overconfident Mike Tyson paved the way for the odds-defying performance from Douglas, who stopped Tyson in the 10th round. The image of Tyson reaching for his mouthpiece as he was being counted out remains one of the most surreal moments in sports ever captured on film. Buster Douglas had just become the new, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. 4 months after losing to Douglas, Mike Tyson made his return to the ring when he faced Henry Tillman in a match billed as The Road Back. This card also featured Big George Foreman on the undercard. Foreman stopped Jose Adelson Rodriguez in the second round of their fight to continue his winning streak on the comeback trail, and in the main event, Tyson made quick work of Tillman. He stopped him towards the end of the first round with a big right hand, and Tyson showed the boxing world he still had the ferocious power to be a force in the heavyweight division. A lot of people still viewed Tyson as the best heavyweight in the world, believing that he simply had an off night against Douglas. When undisputed heavyweight champion Buster Douglas took on challenger Evander "Real Deal" Holyfield, it was immediately obvious that Douglas wasn't as physically fit or mentally prepared as he had been 9 months earlier when he shocked the world against Mike Tyson. Holyfield, on the other hand, appeared to be extremely well prepared physically, and he quickly proved that he was also extremely well prepared mentally. Holyfield stopped Douglas in round 3 with a beautifully timed counter right hand. Evander Holyfield had just become the new, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He made boxing history by becoming the first boxer to ever unify all the major titles in both the cruiserweight and heavyweight divisions. Rocky V was released in theaters on November 16, 1990. It was by far the worst film in the Rocky franchise. The character of Tommy Gunn was portrayed by real-life up-and-coming prospect Tommy Morrison, who received widespread attention in the boxing community for his role in the film. The last notable fight of 1990 was the contest between Iron Mike Tyson and Alex Stewart. It was billed as The Hard Way Back, but it wound up being an easy night's work for Iron Mike. Tyson dropped Stewart 3 times in the first round, prompting a halt to the bout with the 3 knockdown rule in effect. With the victory, Tyson had secured back-to-back first-round knockouts following his stunning loss at the hands of Buster Douglas. At the conclusion of 1990, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring magazine. Evander Holyfield was the reigning, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, but many observers still believed that Mike Tyson was the best in the division. Billed as the fight of the year, the first significant heavyweight bout in 1991 was between top-rated contenders Mike Tyson and Razor Ruddock. It wound up being a fiercely competitive matchup with both boxers landing some really nice power shots. The fight was ultimately stopped towards the end of round 7 following a big combination from Tyson, which prompted referee Richard Steele to call a halt to the contest, despite the fact Ruddock had remained on his feet. So the fight concluded on a somewhat controversial note, and most observers felt that Tyson and Ruddock had unfinished business. Undisputed heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield defended his titles against former world champion George Foreman in a fight billed as the Battle of the Ages. Many onlookers believed that the 42-year-old Foreman was simply too old and that he didn't belong in the ring with a young champion like Evander. Foreman ultimately proved that he did belong, making a pretty good account of himself in a losing effort. Holyfield had made the first successful defense of his titles, and Foreman proved that even at his advanced age, he still had what it took to compete at the highest level. Mike Tyson and Razor Ruddock would meet again in a fight billed as the rematch. They were looking to settle unfinished business following the controversial stoppage in their first meeting, and they were also fighting for the right to face undisputed heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield. It was another hard-fought bout between Tyson and Ruddock, and this time there was no controversy. The fight went the distance, and Tyson won a unanimous decision on the scorecards. So it looked as if the highly anticipated showdown between Holyfield and Tyson would finally happen, just a little bit later than expected, compliments of Buster Douglas. On July 22nd, Desiree Washington filed a complaint accusing Mike Tyson of rape. A matchup featuring two undefeated up-and-coming heavyweights, Ray Mercer and Tommy Morrison, was billed as Test of Courage, and that proved to be a fitting name for this classic encounter. Morrison started the fight off strong and he looked good early, but in the 5th round, Mercer stopped Morrison with one of the most fierce and vicious knockout combinations the sport has ever captured on film. It was an absolutely brutal assault. Mercer lived up to his merciless moniker as he launched one big bomb after another with staggering precision. Mercer's menacing display of power made big waves on the heavyweight scene. November 8, 1991 was the date that Mike Tyson was supposed to challenge Evander Holyfield for the undisputed heavyweight championship. But Tyson had to pull out of the fight a few weeks before it was scheduled due to a rib injury. With Tyson on the shelf for a rib injury, Holyfield needed an opponent, and his original replacement was Francesco Damiani, but he suffered a foot injury just days before the fight, so as a last-minute replacement, Holyfield wound up defending his crown against Burt Cooper. Cooper put forth a surprisingly spirited effort, and he actually gave the champion a good run for his money. But Holyfield ended matters in the 7th when he fired off a lengthy combination which prompted referee Mills Lane to call a halt to the contest. At the conclusion of 1991, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring magazine. Evander Holyfield was still the reigning undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Fans were eager to see a mega bout between Holyfield and former champion Mike Tyson, but Tyson's looming rape trial left things a little uncertain. Billed as the last stand, undefeated contender Ray Mercer squared off against former heavyweight world champion Larry Holmes. The winner of this fight was slated to get a crack at undisputed champion Evander Holyfield. Holmes was once again on the comeback trail, after having already twice retired previously, and most observers weren't expecting much from the former champion against Mercer. But the Eastern Assassin turned back the clock, and he used every trick he knew to outcraft, outsmart, and outbox his much younger opponent. Holmes was awarded a unanimous decision victory, and all of a sudden, Larry found himself right back in the thick of things. On March 26, 1992, former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson received a 6-year prison sentence, which he began serving in April of that year. Undisputed heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield defended the championship when he took on former world champion Larry Holmes in a bout billed as Clash of Champions. Holyfield proceeded to outwork and out-hustle his much older challenger en route to a unanimous decision victory. It was the third time Holyfield had successfully defended the undisputed championship, and for Holmes, it was his third unsuccessful bid to regain the title since he suffered his first professional loss at the hands of Michael Spinks 7 years earlier. In a fight billed as the right for the fight, Razor Ruddock squared off against undefeated contender Lennox Lewis in a WBC title eliminator that was the first matchup in a 4-man tournament. The winner of this bout was slated to get a crack at the winner of the upcoming title fight between Evander Holyfield and undefeated challenger Riddick Bowe. Entering this 4-man tournament, Ruddock was widely viewed as the favorite to win. This largely stemmed from his 2 performances against the now incarcerated Iron Mike Tyson. But despite expectations, Ruddock was no match for Lewis. Lewis put on a magnificent display of power, dropping Ruddock 3 times inside of 2 rounds, with the 3rd knockdown prompting referee Joe Cortez to wave the fight off. Lewis made a huge statement and officially earned himself a crack at the title against the winner of Holyfield Bowe, which was now just 2 short weeks away. In an instant classic, in a fight that would ultimately be viewed as one of the best heavyweight title fights in the rich history of boxing, Riddick Bowe captured the undisputed heavyweight championship when he defeated Evander Holyfield by unanimous decision in an absolute battle for the ages. It was a tremendous back and forth action fight with a lot of dramatic shifts in momentum. The epic 10th round is famously regarded as one of the greatest rounds of action ever. It was a brave and gutsy effort from both fighters, and a real crowd pleaser for boxing fans around the world. Riddick Bowe had just become the new, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. About a month after becoming the undisputed champion, Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis were unable to reach an agreement. Bowe vacated the WBC title, literally throwing the title belt into a trash can. On December 14, 1992, the WBC declared that Lennox Lewis was their new heavyweight champion. At the conclusion of 1992, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Riddick Bowe was the reigning unified WBA IBF champion, and he was widely regarded as the best in the division. Lennox Lewis was the WBC champion, even though he did not win that title inside the ring. Merciless Ray Mercer was featured on the undercard of a heavyweight championship bout between unified WBA IBF champion Riddick Bowe and former titleist Michael Dokes. Mercer had what was expected to be a tune-up bout against Jesse the Boogeyman Ferguson. The plan was to set the stage for a big showdown between Bo and Mercer later that year. But the Boogeyman had other plans, and he was able to control most of the fight and was awarded a unanimous decision victory in a huge upset. There were allegations that Mercer had attempted to offer a mid-fight bribe to the Boogeyman to take a dive. Mercer was charged and ultimately acquitted of bribery charges the following year. Meanwhile, Riddick Bowe took care of business in impressive fashion as he battered Dokes in a total mismatch, stopping the former champion by technical first-round knockout. Lennox Lewis made the first successful defense of his WBC title when he took on former titleist Tony Tucker. In a match billed as Star-Spangled Glory, Lewis dropped Tucker twice en route to a unanimous decision victory. It was a good performance from Lennox, but since Lewis had never won a title inside the ring, he was still living in the shadow of the universally recognized champion, Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. Billed as the heavyweight debate, unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion Riddick Bowe took on Jesse the Boogeyman Ferguson. This one was expected to be a one-sided mismatch, and that is exactly what it turned out to be. The only reason Ferguson even received the opportunity was because he had already derailed plans for Bowe to face Ray Mercer. The Boogeyman was no match for Big Daddy Bowe. The reigning heavyweight champion made quick work of Ferguson, dropping him to end the first and finishing him off not long into the second. Bowe now had two successful title defenses, but both were against lightly regarded challengers. Former heavyweight world champion George Foreman and Tommy Morrison would square off against one another in a bout billed as Star-Spangled Battle, which was totally lacking in originality given the fact that the bout between Lennox Lewis and Tony Tucker just a few months earlier was called Star-Spangled Glory. Morrison abandoned his typically aggressive style, instead deciding to stick, move, and box against his older, slower opponent. The strategy worked, and Morrison was awarded a unanimous decision victory against Big George. WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis took on fellow British boxer Frank Bruno, who in the lead up to the bout described the champion as being, quote, not British, noting that Lewis had fought under the Canadian banner at the Olympics Games. This led to some heightened tensions that manifested during the bout where both fighters put forth a spirited effort. In round 7, Lewis staggered Bruno with a big left hand, which led to a flurry of unanswered shots that ultimately led to Bruno's demise. It was the second successful defense of the WBC belt for Lewis, but he was still widely regarded as nothing more than a mere belt holder, and he remained deep in the shadow of Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. The highly anticipated rematch between unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion Riddick Bowe and former undisputed champion Evander Holyfield took place almost exactly 1 year after their first encounter, and it was fittingly billed as Repeat or Revenge. Holyfield teamed up with trainer Emanuel Stewart for the rematch, and this time around, instead of trying to fight fire with fire, Holyfield played to his own strengths more as he attempted to outbox the bigger champion. This fight is infamously known for the incident involving the so-called Fan Man, which caused a 21-minute delay in the action. It was a close and competitive affair, and when the judges' final scorecards were read, Holyfield would narrowly edge Bowe out by a razor-thin majority decision. Evander Holyfield had just become the new unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion of the world, making him a 2-time champion. Meanwhile, trainer Emanuel Stewart began what would become an impressive run of success in heavyweight championship contests. At the conclusion of 1993, These were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Evander Holyfield was the reigning unified WBA IBF champion, and he was widely regarded as the best in the division. Lennox Lewis was the reigning WBC champion. When unified WBA IBF champion Evander Holyfield went up against Michael Moore, he was facing his mandatory challenger for both sanctioning bodies. Holyfield and Moore battled it out in a competitive affair, and the judges ultimately scored the bout as a majority decision victory for the challenger. Holyfield was hospitalized after the bout and diagnosed with a heart condition. He retired 5 days later, although his retirement would be short-lived as the result of a misdiagnosis. Meanwhile, Michael Moore had just become the new unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion of the world. He made boxing history by becoming the first ever southpaw to become heavyweight champion. WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis made the third successful defense of his title with a dominant performance against Phil Jackson. Lewis dropped Jackson 3 times, the last of which resulted from a tremendous combination prompting referee Arthur Mercanti Sr. to call a halt to the contest. With the victory, it appeared that Lennox Lewis was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows of Riddick Bowe and the now retired Evander Holyfield. In June, Lewis and Bowe had finally agreed to terms for a bout that was anticipated to take place the following year in either March or April. That summer, Bowe had his first bout since dropping his titles to Holyfield. His opponent was Buster Mathis Jr. In the 4th round, Mathis dropped to one knee, and Bowe proceeded to land a big right hand while he was down. Mathis couldn't continue, and the bout was ultimately ruled a no contest by referee Arthur Mercanti Sr. When Oliver McCall challenged Lennox Lewis for the WBC title, most observers weren't giving the Emanuel Stewart-trained challenger much of a chance. This was expected to be nothing more than a tune-up bout for Lewis in the lead-up to his highly anticipated showdown against Riddick Bowe. In the 2nd round, Lewis attempted to throw a right hand, which McCall countered with a crisply timed right hand of his own that dropped the champion. Lewis beat the count and rose to his feet on very unsteady legs. He looked extremely wobbly, and the referee decided he had seen enough and called a halt to the match. It was over. Oliver McCall had just become the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world. In a bout billed as one for the ages, unified WBA IBF champion Michael Moore took on former world champion George Foreman. Throughout most of the contest, the 26-year-old champion was able to easily control the action against his 45-year-old challenger. In round 10, Foreman started finding the mark with his right hand before ultimately delivering the big right hand that would make boxing history when he dropped his younger foe for the 10 count. At 45 years old, Foreman had become the oldest fighter to ever win a world heavyweight title. This historic win would start a chain reaction of events that would soon lead to a state of disarray in the heavyweight landscape. Against all the odds, George Foreman had just become the new unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion of the world, becoming a 2-time champion in the process. At a press conference for a fight between former undisputed heavyweight champion Riddick Bowe and undefeated challenger Larry Donald, the two had exchanged words before Bowe suddenly struck Donald with a 2-punch combination. The fight itself wasn't nearly as explosive. The former champion outclassed Donald to earn himself a unanimous decision victory. At the conclusion of 1994, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. George Foreman was the reigning unified WBA IBF champion, while Oliver McCall was the reigning WBC champion. With Foreman's advanced age and McCall's sudden rise from obscurity, the division was seen as a wide-open playing field. Adding to the uncertainty and making things even more interesting was the fact that former undisputed world champion Mike Tyson was expected to be released from prison sometime soon. Early in the year, George Foreman was stripped of the WBA version of the heavyweight title. The WBA title was then up for grabs when Bruce Seldon defeated Tony Tucker for the vacant strap. That fight was part of a double-header that featured another heavyweight title bout in the main event, when WBC heavyweight champion Oliver McCall made the first successful defense of his belt when he defeated former longtime champion Larry Holmes by a close but unanimous decision. In a fight billed as Celebration, IBF champion George Foreman took on virtually unknown challenger Axel Schultz. On this night, the 46-year-old champion really started showing his age. Schultz fought a smart fight and was able to trouble Foreman with his movement and quickness. Foreman was declared the winner by 2 of the 3 judges, with the 3rd judge scoring the bout a draw, rendering a majority decision victory for the champion. This was a highly controversial decision where many people felt Schultz deserved the nod. Given the controversial nature of the outcome, the IBF ordered an immediate rematch to take place. Foreman would instead relinquish his claim on the IBF belt, rendering it vacant. Former undisputed heavyweight world champion Mike Tyson made his long-awaited return to the squared circle following his prison sentence when he took on unknown journeyman Peter McNeely. This was Tyson's first bout since he won his rematch against Razor Ruddock more than 4 years earlier. As expected, Tyson made quick work of McNeely, stopping his overmatched opponent in the first round. Iron Mike Tyson was officially back. When WBC heavyweight champion Oliver McCall took on perennial contender Frank Bruno, the winner would be contractually obliged to take on Mike Tyson. Bruno used an intelligent jab to set the pace, and he proved to be the busier and stronger fighter on this night. Bruno emerged victorious, winning a comfortable unanimous decision on the scorecards. Frank Bruno had just become the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Former WBC champion Lennox Lewis took on Tommy Morrison in a matchup that had been brewing for some time before finally taking place. Lewis dominated Morrison, dropping him 4 times, the last of which prompted referee Mills Lane to wave it off in round 6. The following February, Morrison tested positive for HIV, effectively ending his career in professional boxing. For Lewis, this was his 3rd consecutive victory, all inside the distance since losing his title to Oliver McCall the previous year. In a fight billed as the final chapter, former undisputed heavyweight world champions Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield did battle for the 3rd and final time in the rubber match of what would ultimately be known as one of the greatest trilogies in heavyweight history. This was the only time these two had squared off without any major world titles on the line. The fight was a brutal affair, with a couple of significant shifts in momentum along the way. Holyfield dropped Bowe hard in the 6th round, and Bowe would return the favor in round 8 when he caught an attacking Holyfield with a big right-hand counter. Holyfield beat the count, but the damage had already been done. Cool as an assassin, Riddick Bowe proceeded to quickly drop Holyfield again, prompting referee Joe Cortez to stop the contest. A month later, Axel Schultz faced Francois Botha for the vacant IBF title. Botha was awarded a split decision victory, but following the fight he tested positive for a banned substance. His bout with Schultz was then declared a no contest, and the IBF title was once again vacant. To cap off the year, former undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson had his second bout since being released from prison when he took on Buster Mathis Jr. Tyson dropped Mathis in round 3 after landing a couple of really nice uppercuts. Mathis was unable to beat the count, and Tyson had now scored his second consecutive knockout victory during his comeback. At the conclusion of 1995, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Bruce Seldon was the reigning WBA champion. Frank Bruno was the reigning WBC champion. The IBF title was vacant, and George Foreman still had a rightful claim as the lineal heavyweight champion. Meanwhile, even though he wasn't officially recognized as a world champion by any of the major sanctioning bodies, Riddick Bowe was widely considered the best heavyweight on the planet. HBO's Night of the Young Heavyweights provided boxing fans an up-close look at 6 highly touted prospects of the time. In the first bout, David Tzua electrified the audience with an explosive knockout win against John Ruiz. The bout lasted just 19 seconds. It was a great win for Tzua, whose devastating display of power made boxing fans take notice. In the next bout, the highly touted Shannon Briggs squared off against Darrell Wilson. Going into the bout, many observers viewed Briggs as the heir apparent to the heavyweight throne, but Wilson had other plans. Wilson scored a surprising upset victory with a third-round technical knockout. In the main event of the evening, Polish contender Andrew Golota was pitted against Daniel Doc Nicholson. After a sluggish first round, Golota dominated the action, outclassing Nicholson with a blend of skills and power before the bout was stopped at the end of the 8th round. With the victory, Golota had established himself as a serious contender, but some questions still remained, largely stemming from the fact Golota had deliberately headbutted Nicholson, even though he was clearly winning the fight. When WBC heavyweight champion Frank Bruno had his rematch with former undisputed champion Mike Tyson, the roles were reversed with Tyson in the role of the challenger. Their first encounter was just over 7 years ago, and given Tyson's dominant effort stopping Bruno in 5 rounds the first time, most observers were expecting a similar outcome this time, and those embracing the majority outlook were quickly proven correct. In the 3rd round, Tyson unleashed a massive combination of unanswered punches, which prompted referee Mills Lane to call a halt to the action. Mike Tyson had just become the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world. The victory made him a 2-time champion, this being the first time he held that distinction since suffering his shocking loss at the hands of Buster Douglas more than 6 years earlier. On the main event of an HBO triple header, Lennox Lewis faced off against Ray Mercer in what would turn out to be a very entertaining encounter. Lewis was the WBC #1 contender at the time, but Tyson's promoter Don King paid Lewis a sum of $4 million in step-aside money. As part of this deal, Lewis was scheduled to face Riddick Bowe later that year in September. Bowe and Lewis were each permitted interim fights before their big date, with Lewis taking on Mercer, and Bowe scheduled to face Andrew Golota. The 2 former gold medalists battled it out in 10 grueling rounds of action. They traded hard shots throughout the contest, with many momentum shifts along the way. Lewis ultimately escaped with a razor-thin majority decision victory, and this was a somewhat controversial call where a lot of people believed Mercer had deserved to win. Lewis maintained his mandatory status, and at the same time, Mercer's stock had risen with the strong showing. 6 weeks later, former unified champion Michael Moore took on Axel Schultz for the vacant IBF strap. This was the third fight in a row Schultz competed for this belt. The first time he had dropped a controversial decision to George Foreman. The second time he had lost against Francois Botha for the vacant belt, but when Botha tested positive for steroids afterwards, that one was declared a no contest. Schultz would once again fall short for his efforts, losing a split decision this time around. Michael Moore had just become the new IBF champion of the world, making him a two-time heavyweight champion. When former undisputed heavyweight champion Riddick Bowe faced Andrew Golota in a fight billed as Big Daddy's Home, it was expected to be a stepping stone for Bowe, leading into the long-time, highly anticipated showdown between him and Lennox Lewis. All that stood in the way was Golota, but the Polish contender proved to be more polished and skilled than most were expecting. Even though he wasn't a champion, Bowe was still widely regarded as the best heavyweight in the world, but Golota was consistently winning the battle of the jabs, and he used deceptively quick hand speed to rattle Bowe with short, blistering combinations. Golota was also doing a good job working the body, but he was having trouble keeping his punches above the belt line. Golota was warned for throwing low blows in round 2, and also again in round 3. He was deducted a point for a low blow in round 4, then another point in round 6, and then yet another, a third point in round 7. Whenever Golota wasn't breaking the rules, he was dominating Bowe. But Golota couldn't resist throwing low, and another low blow later in the 7th round caused Bowe to double over in pain, prompting referee Wayne Kelly to disqualify Andrew Golota. After the fight was called off, a member of Bowe's corner attacked Golota, and a riot ensued at Madison Square Garden. At the time of the disqualification, Golota was ahead on all 3 judges' scorecards. When WBC champion Mike Tyson faced WBA champion Bruce Seldon in a bout billed as the Championship Part 2, it wasn't officially recognized as a unification bout. The WBC didn't sanction the bout, so only Seldon's WBA title was on the line. Tyson made quick work of Seldon, stopping him in the first round to cries of "fix" from the disappointed crowd in attendance. Mike Tyson had just become the new WBA heavyweight champion of the world, and would shortly after relinquish his claim to the WBC crown, rather than face their number 1 mandatory contender, Lennox Lewis. Instead, Tyson was looking in the direction of a fight that had been very long in the making. A little over 2 months after winning the WBA title, Mike Tyson took on challenger Evander Holyfield in a battle of former undisputed champions. The fight was duly billed as Finally, a reference to the 3 prior occasions when a would-be showdowns between Tyson and Holyfield were derailed. First, following Tyson's shocking upset loss at the hands of Buster Douglas. Next, because of a rib injury suffered by Tyson. And then again, when Tyson was sentenced to prison. Tyson had started the fight aggressively, per his trademark, but Holyfield soon made adjustments and was able to outthink and outmuscle Tyson. This trend continued as the rounds progressed, and Holyfield started countering Tyson's wild shots with crisply timed counters. The fight was ultimately stopped after a barrage of unanswered shots from Holyfield in round 11. Evander Holyfield had just become the new WBA heavyweight champion of the world, scoring a major upset to become a 3-time heavyweight champion, a feat that had only been achieved previously by Muhammad Ali. On the undercard, IBF champion Michael Moore had made a successful defense when he scored a 12th round stoppage against Francois Botha. There was heightened security for the rematch between former undisputed champion Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota as a result of the riot that erupted at the conclusion of their first encounter in Madison Square Garden. The rematch was supposed to resolve matters and settle unfinished business, but instead the fight wound up turning into a brutal repeat of their first encounter that left fans with more questions than answers. The fight was an absolute war, with back and forth action that saw both fighters hit the canvas. After dropping Bo with an absolutely brutal combination in round 5, Galata had seized control of the momentum and proceeded to batter Bo with a snappy jab and short, powerful combinations that rocked Bo time and time again. Once again, Galata had trouble fighting inside the rules. He was warned and penalized several times throughout the fight before ultimately being disqualified once again in round 9, following a vicious 3-punch combination below the belt line. At the time of the disqualification, Galata was once again ahead on all 3 judges' scorecards, just as he had been the first time he was disqualified against Bo. It was a strange ending to one of the most bizarre rivalries in boxing history. At the conclusion of 1996, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring magazine. Evander Holyfield was the reigning WBA champion. Michael Moore was the reigning IBF champion. The WBC title was vacant, and George Foreman was technically still the lineal heavyweight champion, even though it had been over a year since he held a major world title. In January 1997, former undisputed heavyweight world champion Riddick Bowe enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. He ended up being allowed to leave after just 10 days of training and would announce his retirement from professional boxing a few months later. He was 29 years old. Almost 2.5 years after their first encounter, Lennox Lewis and Oliver McCall would meet again in a rematch. The WBC title, which had been recently vacated by Mike Tyson, was officially on the line. This time around, Emmanuel Stewart was in the other corner of Lennox Lewis. The two had been working together ever since Stewart trained and prepared McCall to beat Lewis in their first fight. McCall had been having personal and legal troubles outside the ring leading up to the fight, and these problems followed him into the ring that night. As the rounds progressed, McCall began behaving in a bizarre manner, refusing to throw punches, turning his back to Lewis, refusing to return to his corner, and at one point, even breaking down into tears. After a couple of rounds of this unusual display, referee Mills Lane had decided he had seen enough and called a halt to the contest in round 5. Lennox Lewis had just become the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world, becoming a 2-time champion in the process. When rising contender David Tua went up against relatively unknown prospect Oleg Maskaev, a lot of people were comparing Tua to a young Mike Tyson. But Tua struggled with the inexperienced prospect, and Maskaev appeared to dominate much of the fight by controlling the action with his jab and keeping Tua at range. It was a game effort from Maskaev, but Tua's power eventually bailed him out when he caught Maskaev with an excellent combination that included several mean left hooks. 2 months later, Tua would return to action when he took on another promising prospect by the name of Ike Ibeabuchi. Tua and Ibeabuchi traded clubbing shots for 12 action-packed rounds to the delight of boxing fans everywhere. The two combatants would set a CompuBox record for punches thrown in a heavyweight bout: 1,730 punches. Ibeabuchi also set the CompuBox record for most individual punches thrown with 975. It was an extremely competitive affair that could have gone either way, but the judges ultimately ruled in favor of Ibeabuchi, awarding him the unanimous decision, where Ike's high-volume punching won the day over Tua's more powerful but less frequent onslaught. In a bout billed as the Sound and the Fury, reigning WBA heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield had his highly anticipated rematch against former undisputed champion Iron Mike Tyson. This fight would infamously go on to be known as the Bite Fight, after Tyson bit Holyfield, not once, but twice. He bit him twice, and following the second bite, there was some mayhem and confusion. Referee Mills Lane ultimately disqualified Tyson, and this seemed to enrage the former champion as chaos ensued. As a result of his actions, Tyson's boxing license was revoked by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and he was fined $3 million. After Lennox Lewis regained the WBC heavyweight title in his bizarre rematch with Oliver McCall, he made one successful defense against Henry Akinwande before squaring off against highly regarded contender Andrew Golota. Golota was coming off back-to-back disqualification losses against the now-retired Riddick Bowe, but despite the losing efforts, Golota had exhibited a great deal of skill, talent, and aggression. Lewis and Golota both seemed fairly evenly matched going in, and observers were split on who they believed would win. To the surprise of many, it took Lewis only 95 seconds to secure a first-round stoppage over the feared Polish fighter. It was a tremendous display of speed, power, timing, and accuracy from the champion. Lewis was never able to secure the highly coveted professional bout between him and longtime rival Riddick Bowe, but he did just obliterate the man who effectively sent Bowe into retirement. In a heavyweight title unification bout, WBA heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield and IBF champion Michael Moore squared off in a rematch. Moore had won their first encounter by a majority decision. Holyfield was able to avenge his earlier loss, dropping Moore 4 times in the process. The fight was stopped after the 8th round when ringside physician Flip Homonsky had decided Moore should not continue. It was a technical knockout victory for Evander, and this built on the momentum he had established following his back-to-back victories over the now suspended Iron Mike Tyson. When lineal heavyweight champion George Foreman took on Shannon Briggs, it had been 2.5 years since Foreman officially held a major world title. After vacating the IBF title, he had 2 nondescript decision victories against Crawford Grimsley and Lou Savarese. Meanwhile, Briggs was trying to rebuild his career following the major setback he suffered at the hands of Darrell Wilson the previous year. Over the course of 12 rounds, according to CompuBox, Foreman outlanded Briggs and had a considerably better connect rate. But the official judges did not see things Foreman's way, and Briggs was awarded a majority decision victory. The decision was controversial, and many observers believed Foreman had done enough to deserve the win. This turned out to be the final fight in the long and illustrious career of Big George Foreman. Shannon Briggs had just become the new lineal heavyweight champion of the world. At the conclusion of 1997, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Evander Holyfield was the reigning unified WBA IBF champion. Lennox Lewis was the reigning WBC champion, and Shannon Briggs was the lineal heavyweight champion. Holyfield and Lewis had established themselves as the top 2 heavyweights in the world, and a showdown between the two seemed all but inevitable. In a fight billed as March Badness, WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis went up against the lineal heavyweight champion Shannon Briggs. It was an explosive, action-packed fight. Briggs was able to hurt Lewis early on, and he followed that up with a furious assault in an effort to end things quickly. Briggs seemed on the verge of a major upset, but Lewis persevered and regained his composure. Lewis would turn the tide in his favor when he scored 2 brutal knockdowns in the 4th round. Briggs fought on bravely, but Lewis would drop Briggs hard a 3rd time in the 5th round. Somehow, Briggs managed to beat the count, but at this point the damage had already been done. Lewis would continue his relentless assault, and Briggs collapsed for a 4th and final time before the referee called a stop to the contest. With the victory, Lennox Lewis had just become the new lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield defended his titles against IBF mandatory Vaughn Bean in a bout billed as the Power and the Glory. Holyfield had previously been scheduled to face his WBA mandatory, Henry Akinwande, but Akinwande was diagnosed with hepatitis B, and that fight was ultimately canceled. For his part, Bean made a pretty good account of himself against the champion, and Holyfield didn't seem as sharp as he'd been in his previous 3 victories against Michael Moore and twice against Mike Tyson. Holyfield dropped an off-balance Bean with an uppercut in the 10th, and he went on to win a unanimous decision. This was the 3rd consecutive defense for Holyfield since reclaiming a portion of the heavyweight crown in his first bout against Tyson. 1 week later, in a match billed as Battle of the Giants, WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis took on his relatively unknown mandatory challenger, Zeljko Mavrovic. Lewis was able to control the action for most of the fight, but Mavrovic proved to have a solid chin and an awkward style. He was able to make Lewis look extremely uncomfortable at times, and he had more than his fair share of successful moments during the fight. All 3 judges scored the bout in favor of Lewis, but the champion had looked less than spectacular while earning himself a unanimous decision. A month later, Lewis and Holyfield had come to terms and were scheduled to meet the following year. It looked as if we would finally have an undisputed heavyweight world champion for the first time since Riddick Bowe back in 1992. After winning a gold medal in the super heavyweight division at the 1996 Olympics, Vladimir Klitschko turned pro and compiled an impressive record to start his professional career. He was widely viewed as the greatest up-and-coming young prospect in boxing. Vladimir's first, and still only, fight in his home country of Ukraine was against journeyman Ross Purity. Klitschko dominated Purity, but as the rounds progressed, Klitschko's inexperience began to show and he started to look visibly tired inside the ring. Purity had endured tremendous punishment up until this point, but he was able to rally back and turn the tables to take advantage of Klitschko's state of exhaustion. Klitschko's corner ultimately threw in the towel, representing a major setback for the promising young prospect. In an IBF heavyweight title eliminator, David Tua was pitted against undefeated Hasim Rahman. Tua struggled badly against Rahman, who was able to control the distance by staying at range and using an intelligent jab. The power-punching Samoan was having difficulties getting inside the jab, which is where he wanted to be in order to find opportunities to land his devastating power shots. Tua did eventually catch up to Rahman, landing a big left hook that rocked him with just seconds left in the 9th round. Tua followed this up with a flurry and landed another huge left hook, which the referee ruled had come after the bell. Rahman never really recovered from that, and Tua was able to end matters in the 10th to become the new IBF mandatory challenger. At the conclusion of 1998, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Evander Holyfield was the reigning unified WBA IBF champion. Lennox Lewis was the reigning WBC champion and also the lineal heavyweight champion. Holyfield and Lewis were headed for a showdown for heavyweight supremacy. Former undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson made his first return to the ring following his suspension from the bite fight. His opponent was Francois Botha. At one point early in the fight, Tyson had grabbed a hold of Botha's arm, which briefly caused things to get a little out of hand before referee Richard Steele could finally separate the two boxers. Tyson looked extremely rusty on this night, and Botha put forth a very spirited effort as he clearly outboxed Tyson for the first 4 rounds. Botha continued fighting well in the 5th, but as the round was drawing to a close, Tyson landed a quick bomb of a right hand that sent Botha crashing down. Botha was unable to beat the count, and Mike Tyson's comeback got off to a bizarre but winning start. When unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield took on WBC and lineal heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis, it was a fight for all the marbles. The winner of this bout would provide fans with a newly crowned undisputed heavyweight world champion. Or would it? Lewis and Holyfield both fought with a fairly cautious approach that lasted the full 12-round duration. This approach favored Lewis, who was able to score more consistently by using his jab and staying on the outside. Holyfield needed to take more chances to win, and he didn't. Lewis clearly outboxed him with a safety-first approach. The judges, however, saw things differently, and the fight was inexplicably ruled a draw. As a result of the controversy, both boxers kept their respective titles, even though the large majority of viewers believed Lewis did more than enough to deserve the victory. When rising prospect Vitaly Klitschko took on WBO champion Herbie Hyde, Klitschko had amassed an impressive undefeated record, with all 24 of his victories coming inside the distance. The WBO was still considered a minor title at this time. The elder Klitschko made a huge statement, stopping Hyde in the 2nd round. Vitaly Klitschko had just become the new WBO title holder, which helped improve the stock of his family name following his brother's unexpected loss to Ross Purity. Mike Tyson returned to action when he took on Orlin Norris in a fight that would only last 1 round. After the bell sounded to end the first, Tyson landed a left hand that dropped Norris. Referee Richard Steele deducted 2 points from Tyson for the infraction. Prior to the start of round 2, Norris told ringside physician Flip Homansky that he had injured his knee during the fall and that he could not continue. The bout was ruled a no contest, and Tyson once again found himself in a spotlight of controversy. Hasim Rahman and Oleg Maskiev battled it out in a fight where each boxer was looking to rebound and make a statement. Both had suffered fairly recent losses at the hands of David Sua in fights they had been winning. It was an entertaining match where Rahman and Maskiev were both looking to accomplish similar things to be effective. They both traded back and forth, with each man having moments of success. In round 8, Maskiev landed a monster blistering overhand right that sent Rahman through the ropes and over the announcer's table, where a monitor and other equipment came crashing down on the fallen fighter. A little bit of chaos broke out, but Rahman was unable to beat the 20 count, resulting in an impressive knockout win for Maskiev that sent waves throughout the heavyweight landscape. A week later, unified WBA IBF heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield had his rematch with WBC and lineal heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis. In many ways, this fight was eerily similar to the first encounter, with the exception that Holyfield did a little bit better this time around and took a few more chances along the way. Lewis seemed content simply outpointing Holyfield, and given the controversial verdict in their first encounter, Lewis incredibly had no real sense of urgency. The fight was more competitive this time around, And even though Holyfield fared a little better, he still was unable to do enough to win the fight. Lewis was named the winner by unanimous decision, and Lennox Lewis had just become the new, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. 1 week after Lennox Lewis had become the undisputed heavyweight world champion, the last big heavyweight matchup for the 90s took place between Michael Grant and Andrew Golota. Grant was undefeated and considered by many to be the heir apparent to the heavyweight crown now in the sole possession of Lewis. Golota, meanwhile, had racked up 6 victories in a row following his first round loss to Lewis 2 years earlier. Golota represented a big step up in class for Grant, and it showed in the opening round when Golota dropped Grant with a thunderous right hand. Golota dropped Grant once again in the opening stanza, and he went on to outbox Grant and dominate most of the action in a roughhouse affair. Grant would go on to drop Golota in the 10th round, and after rising to his feet before the 10 count, Golota informed referee Randy Newman that he did not wish to continue, and Michael Grant was awarded a 10th round technical knockout win. At the conclusion of the 1990s, these were the top-rated heavyweights according to Ring Magazine. Lennox Lewis was the reigning, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The 90s had ended like they had started, with an undisputed champion. Mike Tyson was the dominant force entering the 90s, and Lewis was the dominant force ending the 90s. For a variety of reasons, the two never squared off against each other during that amazing heavyweight era. The two did eventually meet in 2002. Lewis dominated Tyson before ultimately stopping him in round 8. While the 1990s were technically over, the clash between Lewis and Tyson acted as a symbolic final chapter that brought an unofficial ending to the 90s heavyweight landscape. The 1990s was an amazing time for heavyweight boxing. It may not have been the greatest decade in boxing history, but if it wasn't, it's on a very short list. I'd like to personally thank each and every boxer who made the 1990s such a magical time to be a fan of heavyweight boxing. Thanks for all the memories.